Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, dear friends. This is my fifth visit to the annual World Summits, and I thank Boaz Ganor and his friends for inviting me again and again. In these 15 minutes I have, I would like to talk about strategy. 25 years ago, I edited a volume titled Western Responses to Terrorism. I did not use Western strategies because they were not there. Do we have a strategy now? Yes and no, as you have seen and heard from Mr. Chen, there is a UN strategy, and since he has gone into it, I will not go deeper into it. You see that in this strategy document from 2006, the word internet appears among others. But the other side, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, for them, the media war is more than half of the battle, and we have still not fully woken up to that challenge. It's amazing that after all these years, 11 years since that global counter-terrorism strategy of the UN, we still have not made more progress, despite that 60 states are now forming a coalition against ISIS, of which about 24 are actually militarily involved, but the end is still not in sight. It's not a conventional war with clear front lines. It's an asymmetric, irregular war that has its own rules. But what are these rules? After all these years, we are still struggling with this issue. Yesterday, Sebastian Gorka referred to the guacamole approach that has dominated in some ways U.S. strategies. And Martha Crenshaw, who is also a frequent guest to these ICD meters, has basically said the same. So I think there is something wrong with our strategies. And what we have to explore is to look at the strategy of the other side. In those few minutes I think we have not yet fully understood the adversary's current strategy, and I would like to focus on them. If a strategy does not work as planned, and I think after 16 years we have to admit that it has not worked, if you compare it to the grandiose promises made by leaders of state then, sort of embarrassing. It's time then to go from plan A to plan B. Well, the moment that you change to another plan should be related to what's happening in the conflict area. In practice, however, strategy changes are based on election cycles, certainly in democratic countries like the United States. So we can soon expect a new strategy paper from the Trump administration, and Sebastian Gorka has revealed some of its features, and I was very pleased to learn that the communication dimension receives more attention. This here is my take on strategy. Since Clausewitz, much has changed in the field of strategy, and I think we have to reassess what we mean with strategy. According to Stephen Brooks, there has been a long and serious conflict over strategy within the Jihadist movement over all these years. And a key element that is well known of the strategy of Al-Qaeda was to attack the far enemy in the West. In purely military terms, of course, this was madness given the imbalance of power and altogether different escalation potential of the two sides. But what was rationale of Al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adl, the chief strategist, explained it at that time, and I quote, Al-Qaeda has and always had a specific aim to arouse the sleeping body of the Islamic nation, a billion Muslims worldwide, to fight against Western power and the contaminations of Western culture. In support of this aim, the 9/11 attacks were designed to force the Western snake to bite the sleeping body and wake it up. The ultimate goal of Al-Qaeda was, and it is totalitarian, nothing less than transforming the identity and interests of the world's Muslims. The Manhattan Raid, as bin Laden called the 9/11 attacks, were meant to mobilize the Muslim Ummah to produce an overreaction and by the United States and a mobilization of the Muslim youth. Prior to 9/11, there were years of preparation that began in the late 80s when, after the retreat, not the defeat of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, bin Laden and his small team, not more than 400 men, decided to create a jihadist vanguard. The idea of a vanguard, a revolutionary vanguard, was borrowed from Marxism. The ideology, however, was not based on class, like in communism, or on race, like in fascism, but on faith. It was based on a reinterpretation of Islam that elevated jihad to Islam's sixth pillar and made it a personal obligation for every Muslim. It was Sayyid Imam al-Sharif, better known as Dr. Fadl, who formulated the doctrine in the late 80s, and though he later, under duress or for opportunistic reasons in 2008, retracted from it, it has become the mainstay of the jihadist movement to this day. On the military side, it was Saif al-Adl, Al-Qaeda's security chief, still out there somewhere, who became the main architect and strategy maker. And Brian Fishman, who spoke yesterday, wrote a wonderful book on Al-Qaeda and jihadist strategy for Final Victory, in which he analyzed this in detail. For each of the 7 stages, particular tactical pursuits and objectives within the given time frame were developed. Al-Qaeda and ISIS differed in their approaches. ISIS wanted to declare a caliphate as soon as possible, while Al-Qaeda wanted to establish a safe haven, a safe, secure base, something which they lost due to their own miscalculation with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Another difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIS is that Al-Qaeda believed, like we do, in winning the hearts and minds of Muslims, while ISIS was convinced that a shock and awe strategy based on atrocities in combination with running an effective and non-corrupt government would bring Muslims to submission, the word Islam. Has the strategy worked? The answer depends on what you consider success. It certainly has produced an enormous amount of damage. We remember a few big attacks in the West, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, only a 2% tip. Altogether, about 10,000 attacks have been conducted in the last 5 years only. That is about 10% of the total terrorist activities in the world. We don't have to forget that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are just 2 of the main of a broader jihadist movement. If you look at what Al-Qaeda tried to achieve and what it has achieved, the results are very poor. Only when it comes to waking up the sleeping nation of Islam, we can say it has partly achieved it. If you look at the achievements of the Islamic State, they look on paper a bit more positive from their point of view, but much of that is already in the process of being undone. However, if you look honestly at the strategy of the West, led here by the United States, this is one of the various strategic plans that surfaced since 9/11. We have to admit that at least in half of these things, we did not really make much progress. If you compare the goals set out in 2001 and 2003 and 2008 with what has been achieved with trillions of dollars spent on the home front and abroad, it's quite embarrassing. For instance, one presidential statement said, "Our goal is to defeat terror by staying on the offensive, destroying terrorists, and spreading freedom and liberty around the world." Well, if you look at the Freedom House surveys, we see clearly a decline of freedom in the world since 2008, partly linked to the economic crisis. So while some tactical successes have been achieved, strategic successes have not been reached. Nearly 9 years ago, when I published a book after the war on terror, I included a BBC poll which covered more than 23 countries with more than 23,000 respondents. And these found, in answer to the question, who is winning, that on average just 10% of those polled held that Al-Qaeda was winning, while 22% believed the US was winning, and 47% thought that neither side was winning the conflict between Al-Qaeda and the United States. Well, I think the situation has not really changed very much. In order to determine how well a strategy works, public opinion surveys and body counts and self-serving statements of politicians are not enough. It is a sad fact that we don't have a consistent set of indicators. I tried to develop such a set some years ago, updated it for this occasion, that would allow us to measure progress in a better way. Of course, not everything can be measured with a high degree of accuracy. Crucial strategic elements like the morale of the terrorists and their supporters are hard to assess, though they are crucial. As one IS leader recently said, "Would we be defeated and you, the United States, be victorious if you were to take Mosul or Sirte or Raqqa, or even take all the cities and we were to return to our initial conditions? Certainly not. True defeat is the loss of willpower and desire to fight." To break the terrorists' willpower and desire to fight will require more than a purely military strategy. That strategy might break and kill some mujahideen, and the US claims to have killed 60 to 70,000 in Syria and Iraq alone, but such action also leads to revenge from others. It is difficult, if not impossible, to change the minds of fanatical true believers. What matters more is to make clear to would-be jihadists that their fight will not be rewarded with a place in paradise, and that life on earth can be made worthwhile. For that, an honest, realistic alternative vision for the future for the youth of Arab and Muslim countries and beyond is needed. A constructive rather than destructive vision for what young Muslims want to live rather than die for. However, as long as political power in the Muslim world rests in the hands of hereditary autocrats and military establishments who do not want to open the door to a fairer type of society, rulers who place those who protest and want reforms in the same prison as the terrorists, so long the attraction of jihadism will be difficult to break. A better world is a safer world and a more secure world. After the Second World War, The United States created such a better world for much of Europe with the help of the Marshall Plan. There's a great need for a similar plan for the Middle East, but unfortunately, it's not likely to work with most of the present rulers, perhaps with the exception of Tunisia. Our partners for change must be moderate Muslims. 2 years ago, at a meeting organized by the Global Alliance of Moderates, how many of you have heard of the Global Alliance of Moderates? I said, and I quote myself, ultimately, the confrontation with ISIS and other jihadists and Islamists comes down to a contest of values and visions. The retrospective vision of religious fanatics needs to be confronted with a progressive vision that builds on the values of the Enlightenment, the achievements of science, and the ethics of humanism. It should be a narrative that appeals to all, especially youth, combining the best from the past with what the future might offer with the help of science, if we use reason and moderation as our guiding principles. Next month, the United Nations will deliberate about terrorism again, and a group of states will table a resolution on the importance of uniting the moderate forces. I will be in New York helping them from the sidelines with the drafting of the resolution as well as I can, and I hope that those of you who represent states and are in New York will be on the side of that revolution as well. Thank you for your attention.